Çok saygıdeğer akademisyen dostlar, sevgili öğrenciler, hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Öncelikle 23 Nisan Milli Egemenlik ve Çocuk Bayramımız kutlu olsun. Now, I will switch into English because we have participants joining us from all over the world. That's wonderful to have people from all over the world. And we are celebrating the 101st anniversary of the establishment of the Turkish Parliament, which is the backbone of the modern Turkish Republic and democracy in Turkey. May the parliament live as a strong parliament, a democratic parliament representing all the principles, representing and defending all the principles of democracy. And it is an honor to underline and emphasize that this is the one and only holy day which has been devoted to children by great Atatürk, because the children are the future of a country. May they live in a democratic, strongly democratic and developing and healthy society in Turkey. Now, after such an opening, I would like to make an opening for today's Shakespeare Day. As we all know, it is the internationally acclaimed Shakespeare Day, accepted as his birthday. And I must also say that in the recent years, unfortunately, some of our senior Shakespeare specialists, drama specialists have passed away. But we must say that we are happy on the other hand, because we see younger generation of Shakespeare and drama academics taking their place and continuing with their research, their presentations, publications in the field in Turkey. Moreover, I would like to underline the fact that when I heard this, I was very happy and very proud. Only in 7 countries all over the world has the complete works of Shakespeare been translated into that language. And one of these is Turkish. The whole complete works were completed, the translation was completed by late Talat Halman. And I brought out the book also. In 2014, he translated the poems, Aşk ve Anlatı Şiirleri. So now we have the complete set. And we have not only one translation for some of the works, but we do have many translations for some of the works, but now we have the complete set. So it is a wonderful thing to know that Turkey ranks among those countries where all the works can be read in the native tongue. It is only in keeping that today our speaker is one of the young generation. I know he's not a child, but among the scholars, he is a young one. And I think that also contributes to the spirit of 23 Nisan. I would briefly like to introduce Assistant Professor Dr. Murat Öğütcü. Many of us are familiar with him, but I know there are some students who may be listening to him for the first time, might have heard his name from some of the lecturers in the department. Dr. Murat Öğütcü received his PhD degree with his dissertation entitled Shakespeare's Satirical Representation of the Elizabethan Court and the Nobility in His English History Plays. He received his PhD from Hacettepe Üniversitesi English Language and Literature Department in 2016. From August 2012 to 2013, he was a visiting scholar at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And since his graduation, that is from 2016 onwards, he is the head of the Department of Western Languages and Literatures at Munzur University. He is also a researcher at the AHRC-funded project, Medieval and Early Modern Orients, which aims to contribute to our understanding of the medieval and early modern encounters between England and the Islamic worlds. He has written book chapters, articles, and he's doing research and has given talks on early modern studies, Shakespeare, and cultural studies. I would like to mention some of them now. Masculine Dreams, Henry V and the Jacobean Politics of Court Performance, Of Fathers and Sons, Intergenerational and Interfamilial Loyalties and Conflict in Shakespeare's Elizabethan History Plays. Then comes a German one, but I'm not going to test my German here. I'm going to give the English translation title, Of Friends and Factions, Shakespeare's History Plays. Julius Caesar, Tyrannicide Made Unpopular. Public Execution and Justice on/off the Elizabethan Stage. Shakespeare in Animation. Early Modern English Historiography, Providentialism versus New History. A Tale of Two Nations, Chaucer, Henryson, Shakespeare, Troilus and Cressida. The Gothic in Hamlet, and Teaching Shakespeare Digitally, the Turkish Experience. Before he begins, I would like to thank Dr. Murat Öğütcü for accepting our invitation, although these were tough times for him. And I do wish to express my most deepest condolences for his loss. Yes, Murat, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your introduction and for having me back home in this very meaningful day, both for Turkey and both for Shakespeare. So I guess you are able to see my screen, my PowerPoint, and let's begin. So the tale of Shakespeare in Turkey is not a new one, despite the fact that some of the younger generations might only know him via the very deep lyrics of Hande Yener's song Romeo, Romeo, Romeo, who hugs me until morning. Although we cannot exclude the possibility of English actors in Ottoman Turkey since the late 16th century, which saw many foreign traveling theater companies perform in civic and courtly festivities, as Sevengil and Ant mentioned, let alone the probability that Shakespeare was read by English, German, or French expatriates, as Enginen asserts, the first documented performances of Shakespeare in Turkey were done by Ottoman Armenian and Ottoman Greek theater companies, which performed Shakespeare in Armenian, and Greek, respectively, in the 19th century. For most of these initial phases of Shakespeare in Turkey, we only have some secondary reflections, as the playtexts of these productions were not published and have remained lost until this day, as Enginen says. Documents about some early productions of like the 1842 Ottoman Greek production of Romeo and Juliet, Othello, and Hamlet, or the opera version of Macbeth in 1848, do only have a list of actors and a summary of the play without any further information, as Ant puts forth. The Eastern Theatre Company, for instance, performed many Shakespearean plays, where Fasul Yajian played Othello in the 1840s, and Atamyan, you see his picture here, played Hamlet in the 1850s, but only some photos and playbills have remained, as I've stated. Among notable Ottoman Greek actors was a certain Sautsas, who played Othello in 1860s, and was at that time often compared to Ira Aldrich, who performed the same role in 1866 in Istanbul, as Ant and Enginen state. Apart from Aldrich's company, other European theater companies toured in Istanbul in the 1870s and 1880s and performed Shakespeare in their own languages on the popular stage and in front of the Sultan. While the production of Shakespeare's plays by both native and foreign touring companies increased the popularity of Shakespeare in Turkey, intermittently, Shakespeare, like many authors, was censored on the stage and the page in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, either because of some forced political reading as a witch hunt mechanism, or non-Muslim Ottoman subjects like the Jewish community felt humiliated by the productions of especially The Merchant of Venice, as Engin'in maintains. Despite these bottom-up and top-down censorships, Shakespeare was popular also in the Ottoman court, and Abdülhamid II was moved into tears after seeing an Italian production of The Fatal End of Othello and Desdemona, as Rossi argues, a play which proved to be the most popular one among his subjects too, with several productions and translations as The Moor's Love or The Moor's Revenge, as Turhan asserts. Particularly with the advent of the Ottoman Theatre Company, or Gedikpaşa Theatre Company, founded by Güllü Agop in 1868, Romeo and Juliet became the first play to be performed in Turkish, whose text is again lost. It became another staple play in the Turkish repertory, possibly because of the subject matter that was not quite different from the native love stories of Leyla ile Mecnun or Tahir ile Zühre, often performed alongside Shakespeare's play, as Hunt maintains. Güllü Agop's company introduced many important performances of Shakespeare, such as the most important one is possibly Siranush, who later in 1901 became the first female Hamlet in Ottoman Turkey. Following the success of Ottoman, Armenian, and Greek companies, original Turkish works inspired by Shakespearean themes and conventions became influential in the impetus of both Turkish drama and Shakespeare's place in Turkey, as could be seen in Shakespeare's influence on figures like Namık Kemal or Abdülhak Hamid. Apart from the many adaptations of, for example, Othello or Hamlet into native, improvisational, and non-Aristotelian Turkish dramatic forms by Komik Naşit or Othello Kamil, as Dinçel and Alman state. This was also paralleled with the increasing number of Turkish translations of Shakespeare that was the result of the establishment of the Office of Translators in Istanbul, and as an extension of the Ottoman Empire's westernization efforts, according to Turhan and Ant. The first translations of Shakespeare into Turkish were either retranslations from other languages, notably French, or from other genres like opera versions, or from Charles Lamb's family-friendly version. While the first translation of Shakespeare in Turkish was that of Othello from an abridged French version in 1876, and was also used in the second production of Shakespeare in Turkish at the Gedikpaşa Theatre Company, and extras from Shakespeare's extracts from Shakespeare's Tempest were published as installments as early as 1878, the first proper translation of Shakespeare was that of Comedy of Errors. And here you see a copy of Hasan Sırrı's 1887 Sevhi Mutik. Other notable early translations were done by Mihran Boyajian and Mehmet Nadir in the 1880s, by the infamous Dr. Abdullah Cevdet, a copy of his grandiloquent 1908 Hamlet you see here, and by Halide Edip. Halide Edip is an interesting figure because she had a love and hate relationship with Shakespeare as a reflection of the traumatic experience of westernization and the invasion of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I by the victorious European powers. In her famous Sultanahmet meeting oration against British and European imperialism, Halide Edip cited from Macbeth and said the following, quote, "Those who call us Turks evil are so evil themselves that the ocean's waters cannot cleanse them," unquote. Reflecting the frustration with the West and the Turks' efforts to become part of it, Edip writes back at the imperialist British by appropriating Shakespeare as a means to criticize them with the values of economic, cultural, and technological progressivism the West seems to follow merely as a lip service. Despite this frustration, Shakespeare did not cease to be popular among Turks at that period, which was especially thanks to Muhsin Ertuğrul, who almost single-handedly brought Shakespeare to a wider audience in Turkey, documented also in his own memoir. Being the first Turk to perform Hamlet in Turkish in 1912, he was a dramatist, artistic director, educator, and producer who, via his intermittent directorship of the Istanbul City Theatre and the state theatres cast a long shadow and legacy on how Shakespeare has been interpreted in Turkey. Through his educational visits to or productions in countries like France, Germany, the UK, or the USSR, Ertuğrul had a great impact on the westernization and flourish of Turkish theater, where Shakespeare became the backbone of his repertory. He received, for instance, some pictures of productions of Hamlet, this one, and Macbeth, this one, The Comedy of Errors, and Romeo and Juliet in the 1920s and 1930s, which used a variety of theater techniques ranging from avant-garde costumes and scenery to those trying to recreate historical accuracy. But of course, Ertuğrul was also an ardent supporter of native Turkish theater and encouraged the writing of new Turkish plays at that period. Apart from bringing innovative performance effects to the Turkish stage, Ertuğrul as a director and as an educator left many students. Cüneyt Gökçer, for instance, became his successor as head of the state theaters from 1958 to 1983. His other students like Engin Cezar, one of the youngest Hamlets in the world, as I remember, and Kerim Afşar or Haluk Kurtoğlu were among these students, and some of whom later became directors themselves, who partially continued Ertuğrul's vision of theater well into the early 1990s. But before we move on to more recent understandings of Shakespeare in Turkey, we have to look at another key reason why Shakespeare became an indispensable part in the theater of the Turkish Republic. While Muhsin Ertuğrul's lifelong admiration with Shakespeare began before the establishment of the Republic, it was the Republic and its progressivism that laid the groundwork for Ertuğrul's success and Shakespeare's preeminence, fed by Ertuğrul's and the Republic's reciprocal efforts. The theater, among many artistic forms, was seen as a means to naturalize the progressive revolutions of the Republic to a wider audience, which manifested itself in the most apparent way in the legal introduction of female Turkish and Muslim performers on the stage. The theater became thereby a forum for exhibiting and teaching Western and progressive forms of egalitarian gender relations that guaranteed equal opportunities, as Yüksel, Ant, and Şener maintain. And it was not surprising that the first allowed female performer, here, Bediye Muvakit, played a Shakespearean role, namely Desdemona. Not sharing the tragic fate of Afife Jale, whose forbidden love for theater cost her sanity and life in Ottoman Turkey, actresses like Yıldız Kenter, Ayten Gökçer, Ayla Algan, and many more have been able to express themselves freely while performing Shakespeare on the Turkish stage. And ever since, these have performed Shakespearean roles, either as female characters or as major male characters in gender-blind productions like the female Hamlet performed by Ayla Algan in 1962. And you have to mind that Ayla Algan is not just your refugee aunt from your TV series Aliye. Okay? So the instrumentalization of Shakespeare for this westernization agenda was also backed by the state-sponsored translation policies that literally fed the need of the public and the stage to find better text to tell Shakespeare in Turkish. Since Shakespeare, among many other Western literary figures, was seen as a key vehicle for the country's westernization process, an increasing number of his plays began to be retranslated or translated, as Burçin Hoca has already mentioned. One tradition was led by the Ministry of Education from the 1930s to the 1950s, and another important tradition was done under the supervision of Halide Edip Adıvar and her students at Istanbul University from the 1940s to the 1950s via workshops that led to many new translations of Shakespeare. There have been numerous translators, and we don't have time until eternity, unfortunately. But the most prominent translators whose translations are still used in the repertory of most of the theater companies in Turkey are those of Sebahattin Eyüpoğlu, Orhan Buryan, Can Yücel, Bülent Bozkurt, and Özdemir Nutku, the late. May he rest in peace. In recent productions, Emine Ayhan's translations have also been used by theater companies, and as again Burçin Hoca has mentioned, since 2014, Turkish has been among the few languages in the world in which all of Shakespeare's dramatic and poetic works have been translated. In line with Shakespeare's position in the young republic, Shakespeare became an important part of textual and performance studies in the curriculum in primary, secondary, and higher education, both in literature, drama, and in English departments, though now Shakespeare is studied only in some secondary schools and primarily in higher education. Nevertheless, as part of Shakespeare's pedagogical function in Turkey, curricula have been usually crowned with a student production of one of Shakespeare's plays at the end of each term. All of these have led to the production of many secondary sources on Shakespeare in Turkish that have furthered our understanding of Shakespeare here in Turkey, without which this lecture could not have been delivered at all. So if we turn back to the historical development of Shakespeare in Turkey, it can be said that the 1960s were a turning point in many ways of how Shakespeare was perceived in Turkey. One of the most cited productions were the 1960s Rumeli Hisar productions, where the use of military cadets as extras led to their chanting Allah, Allah, Allah, Allah, the Islamic battle cry in the final battle of a Macbeth production, which unfortunately has been ever seen as an anecdotal joke to be laughed at rather than embraced and celebrated as a Turkish interpretation. The reason for this self-contemptuous attitude is probably the basic problem that still needs to be resolved about Turkish Shakespeares in Turkey. When Ertuğrul, as part of the celebrations of Shakespeare's 400th birthday in 1964, staged several Shakespeare plays in very innovative ways, it stirred, for instance, an unfair campaign against him, which primarily accused him of mimicry by figures like And and Özatman. As a foreign spectator exclaimed in the same year, after seeing these very successful productions, the quality of Turkish theater was comparable to that of the Royal Shakespeare Company, which gives Ertuğrul his due. But Ertuğrul's production lacked any sign of Turkishness, as the spectator asserts, which supports the view of his accusers. Apart from the tumult that arose after the 1964 celebrations, another decisive blow against Shakespeare in Turkish theaters was the year 1968. Despite the fact that one of the most successful private theater companies, the Kenterler Theater Company, opened its curtains with a production of Hamlet in 1968, when the state theaters under the lead of Cüneyt Gökçer had already began to push Shakespeare into the background and support even more original Turkish plays like those of Orhan Esana or Turan Oplasoğlu, who was also a prominent Shakespeare scholar himself. The rising Brechtian and left-wing theater in the 1960s was decisive to push Shakespeare to the margins. This theater was consciously used as a means to protest against the repertory of the semi or fully state-controlled theaters because Shakespeare's overwhelming presence was seen as an icon of apolitical cultural appropriation. However, it's quite interesting that the fading presence of Shakespeare on the stage led to its flourish in Turkish cinema, which was influenced both by the native Turkish tradition of Shakespeare in drama, education, and translation, and Zeffirelli's 1968 Romeo and Juliet, the latter of which was influential to attract Turkish directors. Domesticizing the play's setting to the Turkish countryside, Memduh Ün's Murat en Nazlı, which was performed by Cüneyt Arkın and Fatma Girik, depicts how a blood feud separates two lovers for many years only to reunite them in their old age. While the use of Leroy Holmes's instrumental version of Nino Rota's the music in Zeffirelli's movie naturally creates a proximity of both Shakespeare's play and Zeffirelli's adaptation with Ün's series movie, the choice of having a happy ending for Murat en Nazlı could be considered a Turkish reply that happiness is somehow possible despite the stars. Orhan Aksoy's Hayat Bayram Olsa, 1973, May Life Be a Holiday, is similarly domesticizing Shakespeare's play, but now in a small town in the seaside where again feuding families try to prevent happy endings for the lovers, now performed by Kadir İnanır and Hülya Koçyiğit. Compared to Ün's vision, Aksoy's movie is more in the comic mode and presents the fake deaths of the lovers really as fake ones to send with the families the didactic message that lovers should not be separated. Once again, leaving out the deaths of the lovers, the movie, as an allusion to its title, sends the message that every day should be like a holiday in revelry and happiness. Metin Erksan's Kadın Hamlet, that is Female Hamlet, or The Angel of Vengeance, 1976, is a surreal adaptation that uses and plays upon many conventions of Turkish cinema and theater, like the rural film genre, domestic melodrama, or native improvisational Turkish theater, as Sayın maintains. It is set at a ranch owned by a wealthy landlord whose daughter, studying drama in the US, comes back for her father's funeral. And Erksan's almost psychedelic rendition, coupled with the energy of Fatma Girik's acting technique, make the film an important milestone for for Shakespeare in Turkey. Despite getting many awards, the film did not receive much attention ever in Turkey, which might have been the result that Erksan's critique of the Turkish cinema and social corruption were not received in full by the Turkish audience. However, possibly the most loose adaptation of Shakespeare in Turkish cinema is Dokunmayın Şabanıma, in 1979, Leave My Shaban Alone, starring comic genius Kemal Sunal, which deals with the taming of a shrew, has many status-wise cross-dressings and other elements of neo-comedy that was employed by Shakespeare too, and is quite Ovidian in its handling of the art of love, which much inspired Shakespeare himself in his comedies. But comedies have their end. And now we are in the year 1980, September the 12th, which changed so many things in Turkey, including Shakespeare's position. Following the 1980 coup, we see an almost counter-revolution that reverses the preeminence of the now forbidden Brecht in the theaters back to Shakespeare. Once again, Cüneyt Gökçer performs King Lear in 1980, and productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, again 1980, or that of Julius Caesar, 1984, where here Rıza Baba has not come to praise but buries Caesar, combined once again the big shots of actors and actresses performing Shakespeare with high-quality productions. But they were also marked by a certain caution that tried to avoid any political connotations, even in the most obvious plays like Julius Caesar. Besides, reinterpretations of Shakespeare's plays appeared too, especially after the effects of the coup loosened and transformed into neoliberalism in the mid-1980s. Müge Gürman's Cadılar Macbeth'i, The Macbeth of the Witches, 1986, turned, for instance, the witches into the protagonists of the play and focused on the psychological and social reasons behind evil through the play's critical handling of Shakespeare's rather fatalistic vision of the Weir sisters, as Gürman herself states, a play that could be seen as a forerunner for the transformation of dramatic art and Shakespeare in the next decade. The 1990s can be considered one of the most bold periods of interpreting Shakespeare from a Turkish lens. Can Yücel's translations, who in his own words told Shakespeare in Turkish, domesticized Shakespeare in very Turkish ways, as they aimed to close the gap between the source and the target cultures, as Sancaktaroğlu Bozkurt asserts. For instance, one of the most acclaimed productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream in 1993 took Yücel's translation, slightly changing some details and setting the play at a late 19th century Aegean island, where the couples became Ottoman Turks and Greeks, added not only an interracial dimension to the play, but also alluded to a possible peaceful resolution at the very tense relations of Turks and Greeks in the 1990s. Even in a more direct way, Ümit Kıvanç's Macbeth, Muhitimize Uyarlama Denemesi, Macbeth, an attempt to adapt it to our neighborhood in 1991, criticized Turkish politics and the media through Macbeth, as Engün'ün maintains, which has been ever since a controversial issue. While the 1991 Tempest was quite innovative about the use of scenery, this one, the 1992 Macbeth and the 1993 Hamlet were bold in their depictions of sex on stage set against the mechanic constructions of the scenery that foregrounded the materialism in the corrupt relations among the characters, as again illustrated by Gürman. After such a period, the early 2000s were an interesting one, which was partially prompted by the Great Economic Depression in 2001 in Turkey and the many technological advancements of the millennium. The productions were marked by the extremes of excessive colorful costumes like the 2003 Hamlet or the 2003 Twelfth Night, minimalistic ones in the 2005 comedy eras, and the use of technological devices, as Çağlayan Mazanoğlu puts forth, which, however, were at the expense of acting and storytelling in this period. While the quality of state theaters declined at this period, the quality and quantity of Shakespeare productions in private theaters and theaters that have been part of municipalities flourished. Haluk Bilginer, who received his education at Lambda, co-founded Oyun Atölyesi in 1999, and ever since has produced plays by or about Shakespeare, he has represented Turkey at the 2012 Globe to Globe Festival at Shakespeare's Globe with Antony and Cleopatra. Demet Evgar's performances in Macbeth and in My Fool King Lear have been acclaimed productions of Pangar Theatre Company, alongside Kocaeli City Theatre's King Lear adaptation that had traces of Kurosawa and manga Shakespeare in 2012. Tamer Karadağlı's A Midsummer Night's Dream in 2010 by Tiyatro Kedi and the 2017 production starring Levent Üzümcü have been other noteworthy productions of the decade. But it would be Hamlet who would take the center stage at some of Turkey's most controversial Shakespeare productions, like the 2014 one by Moda Sahnesi Theater, which directly alluded to the 2013 Gezi events, as Günakan states, or the 2017 version by Şevket Çoruh, who has been recently chosen as a successor of native Turkish theater with his emphatically farcical, political, and critical version of Seidel's Hamlet for You as Bir Baba Hamlet. Oh, sorry for that poster. Much better. However, 2014 can be seen as a turning point for especially the state theaters to embrace its legacy with Shakespeare via the celebrations of Shakespeare's 450th birthday through several Shakespeare productions throughout the year and the famous Shakespeare Week. While Turkish productions of Alexander and Darius's Shakespeare in Trouble brought new breath to Shakespeare, the use of folk to represent the fatal cloud of suspicion in Othello, as Çağlayan Mazanoğlu maintains, along with the casting choices, were carefully chosen elements where the harmonious synergy of the performers could be felt by the audiences as well. Although the cancellation of Macbeth, supposedly because of the political meaning wrestling on both sides of the political spectrum, casts a shadow on those celebrations, the one-actor Hamlet production performed by Bülent Emir Yarar, along with his storytelling, use of props like puppets and fabrics, and the use of a nutshell-like construction for the stage that opened and closed itself at the beginning and the end of the play, where Hamlet indeed was bound in a nutshell and considered himself as a king of infinite space, as he says in Act 2, Scene 2. It is and will be among the most successful renditions of Shakespeare in Turkey that should get wider international attention. To catch that attention, the 2018 and 2019 International Shakespeare Festivals, organized by Süleyman Demirel University and the State Theaters, were among the most notable initiatives to celebrate Shakespeare through productions and talks by eminent scholars like Stanley Wells, Peter Donaldson from the Global Shakespeares Project, and the late Özdemir Nutku. Unfortunately, since both festivals coincided with another important national conference series of the IDEA, the English Language and Literature Research Association of Turkey, and the fact that most of the Shakespearean scholars or theater practitioners were not informed about the events at all, the festivals had only a limited impact of being fully representative while promoting Shakespeare, Turkish Shakespeares on an international platform. Setting the problems of voicing the tale of Turkish Shakespeares aside, we see that recent productions and adaptations of Shakespeare in Turkey or by Turks have given new life to his plays by trying to localize and interpret the content method to create multiple significations. Yiğit's İkinci Katil, 2017 up to the present, I guess, for instance, is an urban intellectual retelling of Shakespeare's Macbeth via the point of view of the murderers, which focuses on the psychological burden created by social injustice and personal trauma. Different from other Anglophone retellings, it tells the stories and tragedies of ordinary people in a serious manner without treating these as absurd sidekicks of the source text. Likewise, the documentary about the staging process of King Lear as Kraliçe Lear, 2019, not only shows how Shakespeare's plays can be domesticized, but also how they can be democratized. Being an all-female and rural traveling theater, the performance of the Arslanköy Theater Company gives new insight to what extent Shakespeare might be considered universal. The backstories of both the rural performers and the rural audiences prior and following the recorded performance of Shakespeare's play create a insight at the live performance. These backstories open new ways of signification on the immediacy of Shakespeare's for the lives of these rural people that has been hitherto hidden from the perspective of urban practitioners and audiences. Similarly, Hülagu's performance of Shakespeare's Hamlet as Dream of Hamlet, 2020 and 2021, in traditional Turkish shadow theater form, exemplifies how the threshold between Western tragic and Eastern comic forms of dramatic performances can conflate to breathe new life to Shakespeare. The Dream of Hamlet invites audience involvement and reaction akin to early modern English performances, while the screen creates a transparent barrier between the hidden performer and the audience and illustrates how the medium determines our understanding of live performances. Dramaturgical changes that challenge verbatim textual translations reconfigure our understanding of the live medium of theater as an activity that is not just a time and space specific experience, but a palimpsestic recollection of personal, literary, and cultural remembrances that transfigures temporal and spatial immediacy to a personal one. While with COVID-19, most of the theaters have been closed and live productions of Shakespeare have ceased to exist since 2020 in Turkey, distance education like this lecture and vlogs, live or recorded broadcasts via Zoom or video sharing websites like YouTube, Vimeo, and Dailymotion have made Shakespeare more than ever available for Turkish audiences. Apart from the availability of past and present Shakespeare productions in Turkey in these video sharing websites, the public engagement has been furthered by the availability of content created by vloggers, influencers, and students who relate what they understand from Shakespeare in Turkey. Access and equity through new media have led to the democratization of pedagogical, artistic, and receptive understandings of the many Shakespeares in Turkey. For instance, İş Sanat's YouTube channel does not only provide free rehearsal performances, recordings, free rehearsal readings like the recent one of The Tempest that used Emine Ayhan's translation, but it also puts free and read out performances intended for children that further the geographical and economic accessibility of Shakespeare in Turkey. However, while the extracts of the Zorlu performance productions of other playwrights like Sophocles are quite successful in touching to the matters that are near and dear to us here in Turkey, unfortunately, the Shakespeare adaptations mean almost nothing to the majority of the people in this country, where you have a Romeo and Juliet production that gets inspired by the Romeo plus Juliet adaptation that stars Leonardo DiCaprio, but Zorlu's production always sets the play at a Latino cartel, as if feuding families and the death of young lovers are foreign elements in Turkey. You just have to watch Müge Anlı, a Turkish reality show, I guess. Zorlu performance productions reduce Shakespeare as an author of an elite entertainment, performed in such a way that renders him as a difficult author only to be understood by the learned, which is a problem that should be tackled and not postponed anymore. So, some general thoughts. Shakespeare has an important place in theater and in education in Turkey, but there is still an unresolved problem about how to define what Shakespeare means to us Turks. Is he just a tool? Should we just copy Western forms? Should we domesticize? To what extent should we do it, and the like? Although, of course, we have explored many Shakespearean themes in other generic forms like cinema and in series, where, for instance, the story of Küçük Emrah is basically that of Hamlet, or Kavak Geller is just a modern Turkish version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, I think that we need to increase the number of Shakespeare adaptations that have some meaning, not just for the learned urban audiences, but to the general public and touch upon their problems too. For instance, why don't we have productions of Titus Andronicus in recent years, although rape, honor killings, revenge, and femicide are problems we face on a daily basis, and it cannot purge these errors through theater. Gender relations, class relations, the pangs of traumatic experience, and that of growing old are important themes in Shakespeare we still need to think upon from the multifaceted Turkish perspectives of the intersections of gender, class, and race we have in our multi- and transcultural country. But I'm hopeful. The recent trend where Shakespeare's works have been reinterpreted in İkinci Katil, The Dream of Hamlet, or Kraliçe Lear shows that we are in the right path to do so. So these are some of the references I have used, which I highly recommend for anyone interested in Turkish theater. And most of the sources here are already here in this meeting. But before I finish my words, I want to ask the final question, which I will try to answer to, if you permit. So I have posited some of the problems about the lack of international attention for Turkish Shakespeares. But just pinpointing problems do not bring us anywhere. So what can we do to tell the story of Turkish Shakespeares, not just to us, like I have done today, but to others as well? Today, I have launched a long thought of project, namely Turkish Shakespeares, which aims to introduce texts, productions, and research on Turkish Shakespeares to a broader international audience of students, teachers, and researchers. Every 2 weeks, new blog entries, short descriptions, and links to productions and adaptations, and a bibliography with hyperlinks of secondary works on Shakespeare in Turkey will be added to the website, among many other contents. In order to get the latest of news about this project, please subscribe to receive a letter. And we are also on Twitter, Turkish Shakes, and you can also use the hashtag Turkish Shakespeares. So that was all. And thank you for very much, my dear professors, for having me today here, for your patience for listening to me and to the tale of the Turkish Shakespeares, and for your support in advance. Thank you. You are muted, Professor.
Hocam sesiniz gitti hocam.
Sorry. Thank you very much for this very enlightening, very delightful presentation. I did learn quite a number of things, and it was, I think, some of my colleagues, more senior colleagues, have also enjoyed it very much because it was like travel with the time machine. Since the 60s, I think my generation has been watching Shakespeare's, and it was wonderful to see them and hear about them again. And I do wish you, I'm very happy to hear about your projects. This is wonderful. I'm sure all the Shakespeareans and Shakespeare lovers are going to be interested, are going to contribute, and I think it was high time such a thing was done. Yes, children are the future of everything, as we have seen here. Yesterday's Shakespeare-loving children have become Shakespeare specialists of today. I hope it is going to flourish in a very short time. Yes, if we can stop screen sharing. Yes, I'm sure there will be comments, questions, contributions from the audience. I can see many Shakespeare lovers, both national and international. Yes, the floor is open for comments or questions.
May I, Burçin Hoca?
Yes, Deniz Hocam.
Thank you. Dr. Öğütcü, I would really like to thank you for this comprehensive look at Shakespeare in Turkey, in which you also provided a significant historical and political background in relation to the productions. I would also like to congratulate you on your project. I think it will really contribute to Shakespeare studies in Turkey and make them known abroad as well, significantly. One thing I would just like to make a brief comment. You mentioned Müge Gürman's Cadılar Macbeth'i as a rewriting. Yes, I would also like to excuse me if I missed it. I may have missed it if you mentioned it, but Müge Gürman, I think, also when she directed Hamlet, she interpreted Hamlet at the Istanbul Atatürk Kültür Merkezi in the experimental theater studio, the small studio downstairs. She interpreted Hamlet as two Hamlets, where one is the subconscious, the ego of Hamlet, and the other is, you know, without a social mask. And this was, I believe, in the early 90s. It could be 92, 93, I can't quite remember.
Actually,
did
I slightly mentioned
Okay.
about it. Maybe I can use show you a picture if
Yeah,
PowerPoint permits.
okay. I just wanted to say that that's an important production in terms
Yes,
of
that production.
Is that the one?
Yes, it's this one.
Okay, yes, Serdan Geçti is playing. That's
Yes.
right. Okay, Alper, if I remember correctly, that's right. I think Gürman, in directing Hamlet in this way, with two Hamlets, the inner voice and the outer voice, was influenced by Philadelphia, Here I Come, in Brian Friel's Philadelphia, Here I Come, with public guard and private guard, because that play was written in 1964, produced in 1964. And so she may have been aware, I think she was aware, bearing in mind her connections with the English theater. She was aware of that and brought us a very interesting interpretation of Hamlet. Thank you, Murat. That was wonderful. I really did enjoy it.
You are welcome. I actually learned most of the things I have presented here from you. And as you have also stated, Müge Gürman is a very important figure, and she should be also emphasized in a more and more in the international platform because of her very experimental ways and also her bringing up the many traditions from the English theaters and also from our native traditions in very innovative ways, and usually also surpassing her own time when these plays were performed. So I guess and hopefully there will be also some chapters or some entries about her in the project. Thank you for your support and your suggestions.
Thank you.
Yes, Murat, there is a question on the chat. Let me read it to you. How do you think the legacy of Shakespeare can be perpetuated through new media and digital medium in Turkey? This falls into your special interest area.
Yes, so thank you for the question, by the way. And actually, although this coronavirus has impacted theaters' live performances, especially throughout the world, it has opened new ways to use other technological devices that have been used only in some of the experimental theaters up to now. And apart from using, for instance, Zoom performances, like some of the theater companies like Red Bull in America, they have used a lot of Zoom performances throughout this year, or by recording a performance and then putting it on the YouTube channel, like the Stratford Festival does for free, and or like Shakespeare's Globe does it for just some time for free. It has been important to bring Shakespeare to a wider audience. But apart from that, new media has been also important because it gave voice to the audiences as well. There are numerous videos just by Turks. I will be writing an article about it, about how new media has been used, and I have collected up to now 250 videos just about Shakespeare that are about like some influencers. They just take 10 Shakespeare volumes and they say, okay, I have read all of these 10 volumes and these are my thoughts about it. Or like students who summarize the works and they give some key elements about these works. So in a way, the digital medias have enabled to voice what audiences think, and which has been also somehow hidden. We have just focused on performance history, but now through digital medias, we will also focus on audience history as well.
Thank you, Murat Hoca. There's one other question. Let me get it on the, yes. Is Shakespeare getting a, is Shakespeare getting a shrinking space in the curriculum of English studies in Turkish universities in the wake of post-colonial studies and critical humanities? Let me put in a word about the departments. In all English literature departments, there's at least one semester of very detailed analysis of Shakespeare in almost all the departments. Some departments even have two. When we were students, well, that was a long time, we used to have two Shakespeare courses.
Yeah.
In MA and PhD, they are almost always there. Almost each generation gets some study of Shakespeare. The rest I leave to you, Murat, in relation to post-colonial studies, because these two areas can also be taken together in combination, as far as I know. Yes, Murat.
Yes, actually, these comments are especially hot topics in the UK and the US because of the, let's say, the Black Lives Matter movements and the like. And sometimes this excuse that Shakespeare has been put into the margins and rather post-colonial voices have been replacing it is actually a kind of what I have perceived from the many readings I have done. More kind of from the capitalist views on trying to give some excuses to shut down some of the departments of English language and literatures in the UK and the US. For instance, the Department of English in Portsmouth has been closed down because of financial reasons, but some tabloid news have said, okay, it's because of Black Lives Matter and they have replaced those Shakespearean scholars. It's not. It's because of some financial reasons. In my presentation, I mentioned that Shakespeare in the earlier years of the Republic was taught in primary schools, secondary schools, higher education, and it was used as an important part of the curriculum, most in primary schools. But starting with the 1960s and later 70s, we see that because of the change of the curricula in Turkey, also prompted by some political changes of having some native Turkish curricula, we see that Shakespeare has been scrapped from the primary schools, but he's still in some of the secondary schools. And as Burçin Hoca has also already mentioned, he's an important part of higher education and postgraduate studies. And our benefit of studying English literature is here that we can still study Shakespeare and post-colonial studies from a relatively less biased point of view. And that's why I guess we don't have the problems that the UK and the US face nowadays.
Okay, Murat, there's another question for you from Huriye Reis. She says, I was wondering about censorship and Shakespeare in Turkish. Does domestication involve changing / suppressing Shakespeare in ways that would reflect cultural political interests?
Yes, thank you, Huriye, for your great question. So the history of censorship, not just of Shakespeare, but also of anything in Turkey, has been always prompted by some, let's say, by forced readings and misreadings usually. And like in the period of Abdülhamit, or even later, also in the Republic period and quite recently, there have been people who tried to force read into the plays, saying that, okay, this character represents this person, and that's why we should rather suppress it, or we should rather replace it, or we should say, okay, the actor is somehow ill, or something like this, as you already know what happened in Turkey. And in this history, we see that it's always that censorship is always time and space specific. And that censorship mechanism changes quite abruptly, not even in the same year, when the political circumstances, which change on a daily basis in Turkey here, change. And for the reasons of how how the domestication of, let's say, Shakespeare led or leads into some kind of suppression, I don't think that those who did some kind of domesticized versions like Can Yücel's translations, not just of Midsummer Night's Dream, but also Hamlet, rather than suppressing some sensitive matters, they rather foregrounded sensitive matters. And they use theater as a forum to speak about these sensitive matters and circumventing, this censorship mechanisms especially. So Can Yücel was somehow lucky in that period after the 1980s, somehow, and early 1990s, because then he could voice these things. And hopefully there will be also times we can voice it again.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
There's another question from Özlem Özman. She's asking if you have come across any Shakespeare's in novel form. Oops, sorry, I lost my chat. Shakespeare in the novel form in Turkish. She says that it is very widespread in Western literary world now. Any Turkish examples?
Actually, there are only some translations of, let's say, Charles Lamb's version. I just wanted to find my copy of a very kind of hilarious version, and it's not here. No problem with that. So there are some, let's say, translations of Charles Lamb's version, but other forms of, let's say, in the novel, I highly recommend reading İnci Engün'ün's Türkçe'de Shakespeare, in which she traces lots of references from several Shakespeare's works in all kinds of dramatic and non-dramatic forms. And I'm not sure now about the novel, but as I've mentioned, she focuses on figures like how Tevfik Fikret uses Shakespeare, how Namık Kemal uses Shakespeare, Abdülhakan Tarhan uses Shakespeare, and Peyami Safa and the figures like, I guess, they use Shakespeare and some Shakespearean traces in their works. And Shakespeare, especially, let's say, in the novels until the 1970s, or in any forms, artistic forms, until the 1970s, was used as a reference point. I remember one novel, I guess it is a novel, if you would call it a novel, Halide Edip's, I don't remember now the full title of the work, and let me see whether I have it here. Okay, I have it here, I guess, somewhere here. It's The Mask and the Soul, and there it's somehow in dialogue form and also in kind of Mesnevi kind of dialogue form, but it's still somehow in prose, in which, for instance, Shakespeare is confronted by Nasrettin Hoca. I guess they are both in hell or heaven. I'm not sure about the story. I read it a long time ago. And they talk about gender issues, about culture and the like in this type of, I guess it's a novel. It should be a novel. And I would also highly recommend reading it. I read it many years ago and I don't remember it now in full detail, but I guess that would be one of the most Shakespearean adaptations into non-dramatic forms.
If I may, I would like to share I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it?
No.
Oh, I have to leave. No, not that one. Well, okay. It's the Charles and Mary Lamb translation by Adnan Yalçın, 1965, includes 19 of the plays in tale form, Shakespeare and hikayeler, as Murat also referred to the Charles Lamb translation. 19 of the plays have been fictionalized here in this copy.
Yes, thank you, Deniz Hoca.
There's another question for you, Murat, about the teaching and the curriculum from Jennifer Law. In teaching, would you organize a class on Turkish Shakespeare's historically or by some other means? And are there 3 or 4 productions that you would immediately say should be included in such a course?
Thank you for this great question. So, of course, there should be courses like possibly MA courses. I'm not sure about undergraduate courses because of the rigid Bologna system here in Turkey. But graduate courses on Shakespeare's and on the Turkish stage, or in general, should be there should be such a course, and I would put there texts like, if we have, for instance, there is a transliteration of the 1908 Hamlet, for instance, now published. I guess it was last year published. It's very kind of a wordy translation, but it at least shows you how that the language changed from that period, and that text could be used with Sabahattin Eyüboğlu's translation and other, or like let's say Özdemir Nutku's translation and other translators side by side, and show how the text in a way determines also performance choices, because as far as I remember, there was a comparison and contrast again in İnce Engün'ün's book, in which he compared Abdullah Cevdet's translation with that of Sabahattin Eyüboğlu, and show how the pace changes because of the kind of very old-fashioned, even for the 1908, it was old-fashioned Turkish language. And I would include those texts. And apart from that, in Turkey, in the state theaters, we have an archive, Refik Ahmet Sevengil's archive, in which you can find some of the secondary sources, and also you can also find some of the recordings of the productions. Unfortunately, you have to go there and see some of the productions. Hopefully, there will be also some time in which you can maybe buy or rent these productions, hopefully in the near future, so that it can be used in not just in pedagogical means, but also by other people. And I would also include screen adaptations, like I have mentioned in my paper already, like Kadın Hamlet, Murat ile Nazlı, Hayat Bayramoğlu, and the others, in order to show what we understood from Shakespeare and how we internalized Shakespeare in order to tell our stories as well.
There are 2 comments relating to earlier questions. I would like to share them with everyone. One is from Güven Çağan. He says, Hasan Sırrı prefers to use the name Shylock instead of the pejorative use of the word Jew in order not to offend the Jewish community in his 1884 translation. There's also a contribution from Ece Çakır. Algan Sezgin Türedi's novel, Katilin Meselesi, is a sort of adaptation of Hamlet in crime fiction.
Quite interesting.
That is the only example I saw so far. That's what she says.
Thank you for that comment.
Yes.
Actually, what Güven said about the changing of names, especially the idea of Shylock, and in one of the pictures I showed in the early part of the talk, there was an Armenian performer who used that text, and again the Gedik Pasha Theater Company, and using the name Shylock instead of the Merchant of Venice, and sometimes or rather than using the word the Jew of Venice, because sometimes the Merchant of Venice again was translated from French versions, and they preferred to use the Jew of Venice rather than the Merchant of Venice, which were some of the reasons why the Merchant of Venice was censored in 1905, I guess, or during that time. and before the constitutional revolution in 1908. So the theater practitioners of the day somehow knew how to circumvent censorship as well. But it was a very tough job for them.
There's one more contribution. This is from Gülşen Sayın. I would like to contribute to the list of Turkish Shakespeares by adding Hamlet, performed by Teatro Versus 2015, a performance with resonances from 1980s coup d'etat. At this point, I'm going to ask Deniz Hoca to help me out. Since we were young academics then, living right in the midst of everything happening in Turkey, right after the coup, one of the Shakespeare tragedies, if I'm not wrong, or history plays, I don't know if, I can't remember it, was it Coriolanus? It was secretly forbidden to be performed because it would be too provocative. It would cause an uprising against the generals, they said. And for many years, there was a secret censor on it. And I'm really sad to say, 2 years ago, Ankara Devlet Tiyatrosu had been practicing for such a long time, and Macbeth could be staged only one evening, and suddenly, with some kind of a reason, they said it was going to be discontinued. I don't know how and who found that offensive in what way. So interesting things do keep happening in relation to drama and Shakespeare.
Yes,
Any other comments from the audience? It seems that that was all contributions and questions. Thank you very much, Murat. It has been very, very enjoyable. It has opened certain new windows in our minds. Let me speak in digital words, a new window opening. Definitely, as a department, we should think about, or perhaps the drama departments should be thinking about introducing a course, at least an elective course of Turkish Shakespeares. That would be wonderful. And thank you, Jennifer, for the idea. And it was wonderful to hear about your project. I'm sure it's going to spark a lot of work, and it's going to bring in immense material together.
Thank you. Thank you with your support.
So happy Shakespeare's Day for all Shakespeare lovers and readers. Hope to see you perhaps on another occasion. It was wonderful seeing all these familiar faces and new faces. Thank you for attending. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.